Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and I read 5 books in the latter half of January. If you want to hear about these 6 books that I read in the first half of January, you can check out my wrap-up part 1 for January of 2019, but these are the books that I read in the latter half of January. My favorite book of this half of the month, probably, or at least one of my favorites of the month, is Starswept by Mary Fan. This is a sci-fi dystopian that's basically about humans have made contact with aliens, and all the aliens want from humans are artists and, art and music and art and dance, because for whatever reason they can't do that themselves. So there are these music and performing arts schools around the Earth that basically kids go there and they spend their whole lives trying to become good enough that an alien family or an alien somewhere will hire them. And these aliens look like humans and they have mind control powers. They're a lot like the Lunars from the Lunar Chronicles, only their mind control powers are so horrible that they literally make the mind control from Marissa Meyer's Lunar Chronicles look like no big deal. So, that's pretty bad, right? So we follow our main character Iris as she plays the viola and she tries to be good enough for an alien family to hire her. She was born at the school. She never knew her mother, who got hired by an alien family, and she never knew her father, who aged out of the program without being hired because he turned 21 and still wasn't hired, and he was sent off to do like menial labor somewhere. So she's never really known anything other than the school that she grew up in. And so once she gets hired by an alien family, things are just not what they seem. So this book is so good. I could barely put it down at all. It is amazing. If you hear an alarm going off like that in the background, that's just a fire alarm running out of batteries. I'm really not sure why it's still doing that, because we've switched the batteries in almost all of them by now. I don't know, but we will figure it out later. So in the meantime, please excuse that happening in this video. So this book really spoke to the musician in me and how you can basically be doing what you love, but ultimately it ends up kind of being your doom, because no matter what you do, if you try to make any kind of living out of it, you end up becoming a commodity in a way that you weren't really expecting. So it really made me think of my experience being a musician and trying to be in a commercially successful band that was trying to make it somewhere. And really, the more we got into it, the harder we worked, the more it just felt like we're being told how to look, we're being told what to do, blah, 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 blah. And it just got very meh and very difficult to deal with. And so right from the beginning of this book, before it even gets into the whole like rebelling against society part, it really feels like this is not that different from real life. But yeah, so I loved this book. The only things that I thought could have been improved were just some little things like explanations about that we don't really get, such as why can't the aliens learn how to do music and art and dance and stuff themselves. And then also there are some things that, the main character finds out about from a recording, like a video of what happened. And they were things that I realistically kind of didn't think that a recording would have existed of, something like that. So things like that kind of got in the way and kind of took me out of the story a little bit, but overall I absolutely adored this book and I highly, highly recommend it. I also read Chime Hour by Caitlin E. Jones. This is about a boy named Stanley in 1901 in the UK, and he goes to Ireland to meet his supposed fiance, like this girl who his parents want him to marry, all of this stuff, and he finds out that there are zombies, they're undead all over Ireland, and basically everyone in Dublin pretty much gets bitten by a zombie and dies. And then there's a lot more going on, and it is a very interesting take on Irish and Scottish folklore. It is very cool. It definitely left me wanting to find out what happens next, because I feel like later on in this series, certain characters are going to play a bigger role than they are so far. Probably my least favorite read of this month is The Last Song Before Night by Ilana C. Meyer. This was a 5-star prediction for me, so I was very sad that I didn't really like it all that much. I mean, it was okay. There's nothing bad about it, nothing offensive. It just was very boring. And so this is basically about a girl who is from a prominent family, but her brother just like beat the crap out of her and just treated her like dirt, worse than dirt. And so she left, and she has been basically a wandering minstrel type person ever since. And so the thing that just made this very boring is that it was very devoid of actual conflict and any actual like reasons for any of the characters doing that much of what they were doing. That like the characters kind of lacked the proper motivation, I felt like. And so I thought that the concept of this book was very cool, but the execution just was not all there. And then also the bad guy is kind of just bad with no sort of insight into why he's that way at all. Like most of the bad things that he did were kind of just there for shock value. There was just a lot that just did not happen for me in this book. So ultimately it was kind of a letdown, but it honestly isn't that bad either. So I still would recommend it if you're just kind of looking for something to read and not necessarily something to blow you away. Next, I read Dead Queen's Club by Anna Kappen. This just came out on Tuesday, and I got an e-arc of this from NetGalley. This is about this is actually a retelling of King Henry VIII and his wives at a high school in modern day. So instead of a bunch of wives, this hella popular like jock kid has a bunch of girlfriends, and they're all very reminiscent of the different wives that King Henry VIII had. And actually, what was really fascinating to me as well was just how many of the side characters were also reminiscent of someone from Tudor history. Pretty much everything was. It wasn't just like Henry and the girls. So I thought it was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed this because I'm a history buff. I have read so much historical fiction about King Henry VIII and his wives. And also Anne of Cleves is actually my favorite of his wives, and she is the one who is telling the story. It's from her first person point of view in this book. And so that was a really awesome choice to see. And so overall, I really enjoyed this book, and it definitely made me keep reading. Like, it's definitely a book that sucks you in. But at the same time, the only thing that I thought could have been different was just how thrillery it got in this really weird way that just didn't quite work for me, because basically people do die in this. Like, the same people who would have died in Tudor history still die in this book, and it's set in modern day in a high school. And so it's talked about kind of the same way that it would be in a historical fiction, where it's completely normal, like, oh, these people died, like, big deal. And so that you never see any police or crime scenes or anything like that. It's just kind of people just talk about, oh, well, when this one girl died, I just don't think that this is what really happened. And people are just talking about it so normally, and I just thought that was so weird for this sort of setting. So ultimately, there was a lot about this that didn't quite work for me, but I still really, really enjoyed this book. And lastly, I read No Man of Woman Born by Anna Mardal, and this is about, this is basically a collection of short stories about trans and non-binary main characters in a fantasy world. And so some of them were a lot better than others. I really enjoyed especially the two kind of three that surrounded kind of a chosen one sort of thing, a prophecy, where you think that people would kind of think that this character is not the one to fulfill the prophecy because it's supposed to be a granddaughter of this person, and they don't know that this person's a girl. So those are the stories that I really enjoyed the most. There were some that kind of fell flat for me, because they're short stories, only so much world building and character development can really take place when it's in a fantasy world. But ultimately, I really do love reading about queer main characters in a fantasy world, and the fact that we got all these trans and non-binary main characters in a fantasy world, it was just great, and I really enjoyed it. So I definitely would recommend it as well. So those are the books that I read in the latter half of January. Let me know if you've read any of them and what your favorite book was that you read in the month of January, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye!